This microphone right here is the Shure MV7i, and I sure would like to explore some things about it, share some things with you about it, and kind of dive into why, even though this looks very similar to a lot of other microphones, even though on the surface doesn't really seem that special or unique, why it can do some super cool stuff that I've never seen in any other microphone. Now, this microphone right here is my Shure MV7 Plus, which is very similar to the original MV7, and it is an XLR USB combo microphone. If you look at the back of the MV7 Plus, the white microphone, and the back of the MV7i, they look pretty similar. There's an XLR jack, there's a USB jack, there's a 3.5mm headphone jack. But if you look at these XLR connections, there's something pretty unique about the MV7i, which is that it is an XLR input and not an XLR output. So that means this microphone could potentially be the star of an early 2000s MTV show, because if you like microphones, you can connect a microphone to your microphone, so you microphone while you microphone. But that really is the highlight standout feature of the MV7i, is that the microphone itself, that I, stands for interface. So this is an XLR interface in addition to being a USB microphone. Now, before we go any further, I do want to let you know that Shure did send the MV7i to me at no cost, but as usual, I'm under no obligation to say anything, do anything, to make a video at all about it. I do think this is a really interesting microphone. I bought the MV7 Plus when that was announced because I like the white version, but I also like that it had USB-C, one of my huge complaints with the original MV7. And so I was pretty good. Like, I've been using this microphone and enjoying it quite a bit. But when they announced the MV7i, it really did catch my eye because it can do something that I haven't seen in any other microphone. So let's kind of explore that in every bit. Let's look at the microphone itself and then look at the microphone as an interface. So by itself, the MV7i is a USB microphone. Even though it has that XLR connection on the back, that is an XLR input, not an output. This is only a USB microphone on its own. And right now I am recording into Adobe Audition on the MV7i, but I'm running it through Shure's MotivMix app, which is where you get the absolute best features out of it. The reason I'm not directly recording into MotivMix is that when I add the MV7i to the mixer here, I can't go into the settings and change them anymore. So I wanted to be able to show you some of the settings, and recording into Audition instead of MotivMix was kind of the only way to do that. So if you've used one of the MV7s before, this should actually look pretty familiar. You have different options. You have global settings, mic settings, and then the difference here is you also have input settings, which is pretty cool. So we're going to go through those. The global settings offer Smart Gate, which if you see the description, this is when you have another microphone connected to the MV7i, it tries to prevent them from overlapping each other and sort of tries to emphasize which microphone has the main speaker versus somebody who might just be making a noise or mumbling to themselves or whatever. So your audio output modes, I'm not going to click on these because these could change what you hear in Adobe Audition, what I'm recording, but Mixdown is going to combine everything into a mono track, and that means if you have a microphone connected to the MV7i plus the MV7i audio, you're going to get just one track of mono audio, both things combined. That's the simplest way if you just want to do like kind of an on-the-go podcast. If you don't want to do much editing, if you don't want to line up tracks or do anything, that's the simplest way to go. Multi-track then will break things down into separate tracks for the different inputs, which is obviously incredibly helpful. And then stereo, because the XLR connection on here does have a 1/4-inch input. If you want to connect an instrument, like say a keyboard that has stereo sounds and you want to preserve that stereo thing and not mono, you want to have left and right channels and all that, stereo will let you do that. The monitor mix option is just letting you decide what you want to hear in your headphones. Like right now I am listening directly to headphones plugged into the microphone, and it's awesome because there's zero latency, no lag, nothing. It's a great way to monitor. The headphone amps are super loud. Like if anything, I had to turn it down a little bit. You can also then choose how you want to listen to XLR and TRS, and since the microphone, as most USB microphones, it can be selected as an audio output source on your computer. You can then also mix in the playback level right there. And then you've also got some reverb and some LED options, just like the MV7 Plus. This has Shure's new design where you can sort of change the colors and how the LEDs react here, but this is also how you can change some levels. You can also mute the microphone. If you tap that, it'll turn red and you mute the microphone. This is really my main complaint because it's the same thing with the MV7 Plus. I have just found when you grab the microphone, so often I accidentally just put my finger on there and I mute myself. I'm glad that it turns bright red and lets me know that it's muted, but I've accidentally muted myself so many times on both of these microphones. That's really my only gripe in terms of design is the mute thing. Now, if we go into our mic settings, we do have options to kind of preset it either for speech, singing, or an instrument. So speech right here, you might have heard that. It changed some things by default. One of them, so you have all these options here. The thing that it really changed is the real-time denoiser. So if you're in a loud environment, if it's not sound treated, if you got loud keys happening or whatever, it can try to denoise in real time. I do not like this. You might have heard that this sounds very garbly. If you're in an absolutely terrible situation where things are just sounding really, really bad, this might be an option to turn on to save the day. Although I would, unless you're using this live where you can't process it, if you're recording it to edit later, I would work on denoising your audio in something like Adobe Audition or Logic, GarageBand, Audacity, whatever you're using to edit, because this sounds way too aggressive to me. So I'm going to turn that off. And now it sounds a little more natural right there. And then we've got the popper stopper. So one of the big things with the original MV7 several years ago was that it was so prone to plosives, but right there, prone to plosives. Peter Piper pitched a podcast. If I turn this off, Peter Piper pitched a podcast. It still does a decent job at rejecting plosives, but if I turn that on, it doesn't really affect the sound too much, and it just kind of adds an extra layer of plosive protection. And speaking of that, it does come with this windscreen right here. If I take that off, it has the exact same capsule as the MV7 Plus, the original MV7, and the windscreen that comes with the MV7i is the same as the one that originally comes with the MV7 Plus, which is thicker and bigger than the one that came with the original MV7, which was almost useless because it just let every bit of plosive come through it. And actually, this is a good way to check the popper stopper, because even without that, I'm not really hearing anything. If I turn it off, Peter Piper pitched a podcast, turn it on, Peter Piper pitched a podcast. It really does help because the microphone has no windscreen on it right now at all. Now, if you want something different, like what I'm using right here, I have actually a whole video about windscreens and stuff, but I like not only colored ones because they're fun, but you can often get higher quality ones. This one is pretty decent, and because it's a little bit longer, there's extra dead space up here. So that means that's just extra protection, extra distance between the sound source and the capsule. I really like the MV7 Dock Pops from my friend Doc Rock, who makes these, and these are pretty awesome. I've been using this green one on my MV7 Plus. I could pop it on here. Hello, Peter Piper pitched a podcast. That really kind of stops everything from getting through. This microphone only comes in this kind of like grayish color. It's not black, but it's like a dark gray. Whereas I do really like the white of the MV7 Plus, but the MV7i is the only one that has the MV7i's features. And you can also use SM7B windscreens, either the official ones or ones like this from reporterstore.com. Those will fit right on there. And then you kind of heard it did actually affect the sound a bit. But now Peter Piper pitched a podcast. This is such a long windscreen. It's such a good windscreen too, that nothing is going to get down to the capsule. So there are all kinds of different options to handle plosives. But the really good news is that the windscreen that comes with the MV7i and the MV7 Plus is more than usable now, which was not the case with the original MV7. Now going back to our mic settings, when it comes to gain, we have the option for auto level, which is what I've been using this whole time, and I think it actually works really good. So if I get a little bit further from the microphone, it's going to kind of gradually adapt and sort of change that. If I get closer to the microphone, it doesn't instantly do it, which makes it feel a little bit more natural, but then it's going to adapt the gain so that way it's not super loud. This is really nice because then you don't have to think about your gain level. It seems to work quite well. If I turn that off, then I do get a manual gain option, and I also get a compressor option that has either no compression, light compression, medium compression, or heavy compression if you want that real radio broadcasty sound. You also get a limiter when you're not using auto gain. So if you use manual gain, you get a few other options to kind of help make sure your audio sounds the way that you want it to. But I have actually been quite impressed with auto gain, so I'm just going to turn that back on and leave it for the rest of the video. Now our tone options are the same as with the MV7 Plus, which is really nice. So you go from dark to bright, and it starts by default at neutral. If I bring that over to dark, it's going to really kind of enhance those low end, right? Those bass frequencies. And if I go over to bright, it's going to almost sound very compressed, very, trebly. And natural is more right in the middle. So what that means is depending on your voice, there is no right or wrong setting. If you have a really deep voice, you probably don't want the dark setting that's going to really bring in and enhance those low tones. And if you have a nasally voice, you probably don't want the bright setting that's going to enhance your nasally sound. So it kind of depends. Starting with natural, neutral, right in the middle, usually a good place to begin, and then you can kind of go from there. There is a reverb option, so you can turn on reverb, and you can even decide if you want to hear it in your headphones. Probably not something you need for spoken word, but something that could be incredibly helpful for singing or for instruments and stuff. There's all kinds of options where you would want reverb for spoken word, podcast stuff. No, it's not a thing. And then there is that high pass filter down here. So if you want to turn on a high pass filter, which is going to help take care of some of those low end rumbles, noises, air conditioners, I don't know if I can get the table to rumble. You can really hear actually how the high pass filter did change the tone. This is now maximum high pass. This is no high pass filter. This is 75 hertz of high pass. But as I'm tapping on the table and going through those, you can kind of also hear how it is working to stop those low end frequencies and only let the higher frequencies pass through. But I'm going to turn that off because I think it sounds best without the high pass filter. There's no right or wrong when it comes to this kind of EQ. It's just about adapting to what works best for your situation. And now we can hop over here to our input settings. This is where we can choose if we want to use the XLR input or the 1/4 inch input. It's the same thing because it's a combo jack, but it will just affect how the microphone is handling that. And then you kind of have the same thing over here. You have a lot of the same settings, including phantom power, which is pretty cool that a microphone can power another microphone if you're using a condenser microphone with it. But you also have the denoiser, the popper stopper, all that stuff. I'm going to turn off the denoiser and just keep everything basically the same. As now we can check out how the interface option works. So again, I'm just using this as a USB microphone right now, and let's keep it simple and start with the MV7 Plus. So very similar, should be the same sounding microphone. All right, this feels very strange to connect a microphone to a microphone. So now we can do a direct comparison. This is me on the MV7i, and this is me on the MV7 Plus. It's the same microphone, just with different electronics. So the capsule, it should sound the same, MV7 Plus through XLR, MV7i through USB. So this is pretty fun right now. I'm talking into an XLR microphone that is running through a USB microphone into my computer. I don't know. That's just a cool thing that I've never done before. This is sort of easy mode, I think, because it's basically the same microphone. I did have to turn the gain up to plus 46 decibels to get a clean signal, which is actually pretty in line with what I would do on something like a Rodecaster Pro if I were using the MV7 Plus with that. The MV7i does have 60 decibels of built-in gain, so it can power, Shure says, most microphones, and we are going to test that with a Notorious microphone in a second. But before that, there's another one I want to test. So I'm going to switch back over here to the MV7i. And now, because this microphone does have phantom power, I want to try a condenser microphone. This is the Lewitt Ray. And the reason I want to try this microphone specifically is not just because it's a condenser microphone, which does require phantom power. The good news with that is condenser microphones require much less gain. So as soon as they have phantom power, they kind of work through any interface. So this will be able to work with pretty much any condenser microphone. So if I go in here to the input options and I make sure phantom power is turned on, I see things are working. We're going to turn off that denoiser though. And now I can bring up the gain a little bit. Hello, 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 hello. Here's me on the Lewitt Ray. Now, if you saw my video about the Lewitt Ray, you might know why I wanted to choose this microphone specifically, not just because it's a condenser, but because it does also have these other features. It's trying to adjust its gain to my voice. The Lewitt Ray is an XLR microphone that has a couple of USB-like features, and basically it can adjust its gain depending on how close you are. So as I'm moving further away from the microphone, as I'm moving closer to the microphone, there's a little thing here that will kind of adjust to that to show that. But of course I can turn all that fancy stuff off and just use this as a regular condenser microphone, which makes it very similar to the Lewitt LCT440 Pure, basically the same capsule and everything in there. I love Lewitt microphones. They are awesome, but condenser microphone, not only the condenser feature being powered through the MV7i, but also all of the other more advanced features of the Lewitt Ray, kind of the most extreme version of a condenser microphone that you could use with an interface, and the MV7i seems to have no problem with it. And now just for fun, I wanted to use another non-Shure dynamic microphone just to be sure that it will work with those. This is the Rode PodMic USB running via XLR into the MV7i, and this over here is the MV7i. This is also a good chance to sort of hear a difference in tone. You can hear the MV7i kind of has that, it has more low end, it's more rounded. The PodMic has maybe a little more of a compressed sound, I guess is probably the best way to talk about that. But I can go in here to my tone options, and now I can maybe lean the PodMic a little darker over here, kind of bring up some of those low ends, reduce some of those high ends. And now when I go back over here to the MV7i and I talk into this microphone, and I go over here to the Rode PodMic USB, they actually match a lot better just because I was able to kind of lean this one a little more towards the dark side and keep the MV7i neutral. So this is the Rode PodMic USB. and this is the Shure MV7i, and I like the way that they sound together. Super easy to kind of mix and match mics is what I wanted to show here. So the next microphone I want to check out is kind of the ultimate test. This is the boss level right here, the SM7B, which is my most gain-hungry microphone. We talked about the MV7i having 60 decibels of clean gain. That seems to kind of be right around where typically I would be pushing the limits of the SM7B. I have not tried this with it yet, so I've been waiting for this specifically to do that. But I figured not just is it a popular microphone and a gain-hungry microphone, but it's a Shure microphone. It's a legendary Shure microphone. So obviously they had to have this microphone in mind when they were making the MV7i. So let's see how they go together. So now with that in mind, here's me on the Shure MV7i, and here's me on the Shure SM7B. As you can hear, there is plenty of gain to run the SM7B. I'm currently running 49.5 decibels out of 60. I could crank this up all the way to 60, and then maybe I would need to use that denoiser to kind of get rid of some of that. But there's no need for me to crank the gain this high, so we'll bring that back down here. Typically on something like a Rodecaster Pro, I usually have this at 55 decibels. So if I bump that up here, that's kind of what that sounds like. But it seems like the MV7i doesn't need that much gain to run this microphone. So what that means is the MV7i seems pretty capable of taking whatever you throw at it in terms of at least most standard condenser or dynamic microphones. So with an MSRP of $350, you're getting a very good USB microphone, you know, with all the app processing and everything, but you're also getting a USB interface. Now, the last thing when it comes to using other microphones with the MV7i is how will your guest, your co-host, how will they monitor their audio if they also want to monitor audio? The very elegant solution is you just need a headphone splitter. So since you're plugging in XLR microphones, which don't have headphone outputs and things on them, that means you just need to connect some sort of headphone splitter into the MV7i, and then you can give a pair of headphones to somebody else. You can have your pair of headphones, and this is where everything's running out. This is, you know, headphone splitters, pretty cheap, pretty much anywhere on the internet, like Amazon or whatever. Simple solution if you want people to monitor. Sometimes guests don't want to monitor their audio, but if they do, everything needs to run out of the MV7i. So just get yourself, this is a 5 output splitter. You probably don't need that. You probably just need a dual splitter. So with all that in mind, I think we can just go straight back over here to the MV7i so I can share with you who I think the MV7i might be for, and you know, who this is, why this is kind of really exciting. Because again, in the world of XLR microphones, in the world of USB microphones, we've kind of seen everything, right? It was very exciting when the Lewitt Ray came out, and it was like, this is an XLR microphone that has features I've never seen in an XLR microphone before. The MV7i is a USB microphone that has features I've never seen in a USB microphone before. So who this is for, I think, if you're somebody who is going to always have 2 microphones, you're always going to, you know, be recording with somebody else, you're always going to have those 2 mics connected, then I think something like this back here, the Rodecaster Duo, or even the Mackie DLZ Creator XS, is probably the best way to go, because you're going to still have those dual XLR inputs, but you're going to get physical faders, you're going to be able to mix in USB channels, you're going to get physical controls, onboard recording. You're going to end up with a piece of equipment that sort of makes that workflow a lot easier. But, you know, the Rodecaster Duo is $500 MSRP, and then you have to get your microphones to go along with that. So if you're not using 2 microphones all the time, if it's just kind of once in a while or whatever on random occasions, you can use the MV7i as, you know, your main USB microphone, use it for everything. And then whenever you need that other person, you can just plug in a microphone. Maybe they even have their own microphone, so they show up and you just connect it to yours and you're good to go. You don't need any other cables. You don't need any other interfaces. Typically in this situation, the cheapest way you could do it is to get like a bare bones 2 microphone input, like a Focusrite Scarlett, which is, you know, $150-ish, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little bit more. And then plus, you know, your 2 microphones to run into it. So you have 2 XLR cables running into here and then a USB cable running out. In this case, you only have 1 XLR cable running in here and your USB cable running out. So you've eliminated a cable. I like that because that eliminates a possible point of failure, a possible point of interference. All of those, you know, the simpler you can make a setup, the less chance it has to mess up. Oh, you know what? There is one last thing I actually want to try with the SM7B, and I just got really curious about this, is it has plenty of gain, but if you were in a situation where you didn't have enough gain, could this just power a booster? So if you were wondering, this is now the SM7B running through the what is this called? The FET head into the MV7i. It's a lot of product names to remember. And the booster does require phantom power. The microphone is providing that no problem. And now I only have to run the SM7B at 17 decibels of gain to get a good signal, to get a clean signal instead of 50 decibels. It doesn't really make a difference, but you might notice the signal is a little bit quieter because there's less background hiss because I'm using less gain. I don't think there's any reason to use a booster with a microphone like this. I don't think you need to. The SM7B kind of proves that, the fact I could run it without it. But I do think it's pretty cool that it can do that. It can do everything you would expect from a standard XLR interface, except it just also happens to be a microphone. It's almost like the way that the small 2.4 gigahertz systems put a microphone onto a transmitter, which was very unusual. This is like it put a microphone onto an interface, and now that's what you get to do. So that's kind of cool. It can basically do everything a regular interface can do that you would expect. So I hope this gives you an idea of what the Shure MV7i can do. And when you see a microphone that looks very similar to the MV7 Plus and you're wondering, why does that exist? Then you'll know all the different things that it can do. It's definitely not a microphone for everyone, but it is a microphone that solves some really specific problems for some really specific workflows. And if you find yourself in that group, then I think you're going to be really, really happy. And speaking of groups that you would no doubt be happy to be a part of, thank you to everyone who helps support the channel through YouTube channel memberships. And if you do want to learn a bit more about that Shure MV7 Plus, check out my full review on that right here. And some pretty other awesome mic reviews and comparisons right here.